Then I felt an overwhelming sense of relief as the torch beam was switched on, and a familiar figure popped his head inside the tent. I let out an elated sob, the first sound I dared to make in minutes. It was Luke. His hair was ruffled, beaten out of shape by the wind outside. He crawled inside the tent on all fours and scurried up beside me, sitting close by as I relaxed. "I couldn't sleep," he told me. "This place, it's nothing like home." He rocked back and forth relentlessly, as if it was all too much for him. "Come here," I said quietly, wrapping a motherly arm around his damp T-shirt. His head rested lightly on my shoulder. "That thing you were talking about earlier," he whispered, "what do you think it could be?" "Oh, that was just a story," I said. "Something I made up to try to scare you. I wouldn't pay any attention to it." "You've seen it, though, haven't you?" he asked eventually. "That's why you mentioned it back there, isn't it? And it's not just you. Rani's seen it. She said so." I sighed. "I don't know what we saw," I said, trying to be as honest as I could. "The mind can play funny games with you sometimes, especially when you're somewhere new, somewhere you're not familiar with." "But you must have seen things," he continued. "When you travelled with the doctor, you must have seen creatures that can take on other forms. Shapeshifters or clones or something. Do you think that's what this might be? And what's it doing here anyway, out in the middle of nowhere?" "Mom?" I smiled, but I didn't say a word. As usual, Luke wanted to learn, to understand the world around him. Not just this world either. He had 1,000,001 questions, all of them fresh and bright and new. But I didn't have any answers. Not this time. We sat there for a minute or two, just holding one another in silence, listening to the sounds of the storm outside. And I yawned. Couldn't help it. And Luke shifted beside me, kissing me gently on the cheek. "Night, Mum," he said, disappearing through the tent flaps as quickly as he'd arrived. Back into the storm outside, taking his torch with him. It was going to get soaked. I crawled across to the front of the tent, poking my head out to offer him a coat. But Luke was nowhere to be seen. Yet in the darkness, I could see something. 2 red lights in the distance, shining through the rain. It was those eyes again, burning into me. As I watched, they seemed to grow wider, staring directly at me. If the eyes belonged to a human figure, I couldn't make it out. It was as if it was cast in shadow from the neck down, everything concealed in darkness. I must have sat there for several minutes, just watching the eyes, entranced by their stillness. Not once, in all that time, did they so much as flinch or twitch. Not a hint of movement. And then they vanished. I waited a long time for them to reappear, but they seemed to be gone for good. Eventually I went back to bed, fastening the zips securely, closing my eyes tight and trying to convince myself it had all been a trick of my imagination. But as I tried to sleep, all I could see were those 2 red orbs boiling in their sockets, shining blotches of red now swimming inside my eyelids.